As I started the semester with really kind of advising you that things things could change as we speak and things could go a different direction with the class. And with the Ezekiel Elliott situation happening as we speak, sort of in the middle of it, it's incumbent upon us to sort of follow this, to talk about it. This is exactly the type of things we talk about in this class, and it's happening right in front of us with a star player in the beginning of the season with the most recognizable franchise in all of NFL. So it's happening. And we're going to talk about it, following up the sort of presentation of what's happening last week. We had a big case decision on Friday, which was a stunner, again, and I'll explain why it's a stunner. Someone's going to sort of tell us about it, and there's more to come this week, and there's more to come next week. So just like Brady 2 years ago, which we'll talk about after Elliott, we're in the middle of it, okay? We are seeing a change in sports law as we speak. It's happening at the highest levels, the most recognizable league, the most recognizable team, one of the most recognizable players, and the whole issue of commissioner power. It's happening right in front of us at the lower court level, and then we're going to see it happen this week, by Friday, I would think, at the higher court level. The NFL has been in now 3 circuits. How many circuits are there? Circuit courts of appeals. 9? Someone take Civ Pro or something like that? How many? 11 plus DC? Okay, so now the NFL against one of its players in the past 2 years is now in the third of those 3 of those circuits. It was the second with Brady, second circuit, it was the 9th with Adrian Peterson, and now it's in the 5th circuit with Ezekiel Elliott. And again, the backdrop to all of this is what I've said at the beginning and what we'll study the rest of the course, which this should not be happening. This should not be happening. Sports law is governed by collective bargaining agreements. Sports law is governed by the 2 paradigms, the owners, the commissioner of the leagues getting into a room with the union, the agents, the players, and hammering out a deal that deals with this stuff, right? That takes care of this stuff. This stuff meaning discipline. And we'll talk about safety and head injuries and how much you make and what is free agency and what's a cap, what's your cap, and what's your, what's the draft rules. All of that's in this document that's 400 pages called the collective bargaining agreement, and it's supposed to keep everything in-house. Like if we're the sports league in this room, nothing should get outside of it. But in the NFL, it's happening for the 3rd time in 2 years. It's astounding as a sports law expert to see this, because it's not happening in NBA cases, it's not happening in NHL cases, it's not happening in Major League Baseball, it's not happening in soccer, it's happening in the NFL, and we'll talk about why. Elliott is a representation of a lot of what we talk about. It is not a good look for the NFL in a lot of ways. We'll explain why. I'm sure you have your own feelings why. And we're treading on very uncharted territory where all of a sudden there are going to be new rules. And if you're a player that gets in trouble, especially now with domestic violence, and if you're dinged in terms of suspension, you have to be looking at the precedent of sports law and saying, screw that, screw the commissioner, I'm going to court. Which is an astounding result, because the whole idea of collective bargaining, forget sports, any business, steel workers, electricians, plumbers, the whole idea is to keep it out of court. Okay, when we talk about labor law, I don't know if any of you are taking labor law, it's all about keeping things away from court, in-house, in a labor agreement. So it's astounding. What's happening with Elliott is astounding. So we'll get to that. And I was in Green Bay the past 4 days. I just got back. I had a speaking engagement yesterday, so we made it a whole weekend. We saw the game, brought my boys out there. I told my kids, like, it's downhill from here, because we get to Green Bay and we're staying in the hotel where the players used to stay when I lived there, but I didn't know if they still stayed there. You know, for people who don't know, home teams even stay at a hotel before the night of the game, or the night of the game. It's just a bonding thing. So we get to Green Bay and our hotel is full of the players walking around. So my kids are, you know, pretty excited. But it's not the superstar players. So then we go to our room and all of a sudden we see 3 or 4 of the security guards for the Packers that are like whispering to me down this other little hallway. Andrew, come here. So me and my sons with our bags like go over to these security guards. I'm like, come here. And it's a little room where Aaron Rodgers is. He wants to say hi. So we're hanging out with Aaron Rodgers. And my kids are like, you know, they just show up in Green Bay. They're hanging out with Aaron Rodgers the night before the game. And they order room service and we're just hanging. And I told my boys afterwards, like, it's all downhill from here. Like, you're never going to have a trip like this. We just go hang out with the best player in football. I mean, that doesn't happen. But it was cool for them, and then, you know, the game and all that. But it reminded me of my time there. It's just an incredible town for a lot of good and a lot of bad. The bad was you just don't talk about anything but the Packers. And that's really a limited existence, but it's what happens. The good is they really wrap themselves around the team. They live for it. But anyway, it was, you know, people were talking about this whole thing within the Packers offices, league people I talked to that were at the game, and they're all shaking their head, looking at me as a lawyer, saying, again, how does this happen? I mean, this is not supposed to happen. But I want to hear what our leader says about the Elliott case and why it is happening. But again, to set it up, and one thing I want to add from last week, we had discipline on this player. It took a year, okay? It took a year, but in August it was announced the 6-game suspension from alleged misbehavior towards his then-girlfriend. He filed an appeal. Again, right as this class was beginning, the appeal was heard. The structure of the commissioner of discipline in the NFL is it's heard by a commissioner or commissioner-designated hearing officer, who was a guy named Harold Henderson, who's worked at the NFL for 30 years. He heard the appeal. He denied the appeal. That's the in-house part. That's the part where it's supposed to end. That's the part where Ezekiel Elliott has no recourse. It's a final and binding arbitration appeal. He had his appeal. It was a 3-day appeal. Presented all his witnesses, presented all his testimony. But the NFLPA and Ezekiel Elliott's private lawyers decided to take it further. One point I wanted to mention, we'll get into this when we talk about rookie player issues. But Ezekiel Elliott's actions towards his ex-girlfriend, whatever they were in the summer of 2016. Okay, and people have asked, and I think it's a fair question. He had not even signed an NFL contract. How can they discipline him? Right? I would ask that. Anyone know why? He was a rookie, had not even signed with the Cowboys yet. How could the NFL have discipline over him? Your name is Joey. Yeah, and we're going to deal with a case, it's called Leon Wood against the NBA. which basically established precedent that you become part of the bargaining unit when you're drafted. So he was drafted in April of 2016, end of April. He didn't sign till July of 2016, but in June of 16 there are these alleged acts of violence towards his girlfriend, and a series of them, all within a few days, I guess. And that is what he's being punished for a year later. Now there's a few issues here. One is a year later, we'll talk about that. But I think the interesting part, which is still interesting to me, that I've known this, that you can discipline the moment they become part of the bargaining unit, which, the draft is late April. Doesn't matter if they're part of a team contractually. It's assumed that he is now an NFL player, although an unsigned player, and therefore subject to commissioner discipline. And this is an interesting dichotomy, because I'm at the Packers-Seahawks this weekend. Seahawks have a good player named Frank Clark. Frank went to University of Michigan, had a very, very disturbing domestic assault while in college. Came into the Seahawks, no discipline. No discipline. You can't discipline for pre-employment behavior. You can't. So what that means is, if Elliott had done exactly what he did in mid-April instead of mid-June, we wouldn't be talking about this. There wouldn't be a legal case. There wouldn't be something for us to talk about. There wouldn't be all this in the news about Ezekiel Elliott, which is in some ways, right, arbitrary. If he had done whatever he did to this woman the night before the draft, the NFL couldn't do a thing about it. But 24 hours later, they can suspend. It does seem arbitrary, but it's back to labor law. And we learn from a case in sports law, but I think it's, for those who know, I think it's common to labor law. When you become part of the bargaining unit, whether you actually have a contract or not, you're subject to the rules of the game, the rules of discipline. So Ezekiel Elliott is a victim. Well, victim's a really wrong word to use, but he's got bad timing compared to the other example I gave you, Frank Clark. Or who knows how many players come into every sport with serious violent acts before they arrive. They can't be disciplined. The only time an NFL player came into the NFL with with discipline for pre-NFL actions was another Ohio State player, Terrell Pryor. Now, Terrell Pryor came in with a 4 or 5 game suspension for some memorabilia issues he had at Ohio State. But that was different, because that was part of a pre-negotiated deal between his agent, the union, and the commissioner, because he wanted to get into the supplemental draft, which is another draft later in the year for people who either flunk out or have some issues after the regular draft. So anyway, in order for him to get into it, which everyone was seeing as kind of a way around getting out of school, they negotiate an agreement. So that does not fall into the category where people would say, well, hey, it's been done before, discipline for actions pre-NFL. No, that was a negotiated deal for Pryor. Okay, so Elliott's actions post-draft, pre-contract, subject to discipline. A player like Frank Clark, pre-draft, pre-contract, no discipline. Any questions about that? Okay, so who's going to take us up to where we are now with Elliott? Someone. Your name is? Ryan. Ryan? Okay. From Hattiesburg?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, as pretty much everyone knows, Elliott filed an injunction against the NFL suspension, which was granted by the court on Friday, so he was allowed to play on Sunday. The NFL appealed the decision on Monday. It's now on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is really slow, so they may not get a determination until the 2018 season.
Okay. And why did Elliott win this, in your opinion, or from what you read? In the federal court, the lower court.
He claimed that the NFL procedure was fundamentally unfair. He was going to live against division of power, and the lower court decided that the structure was fundamentally unfair. Their review.
Okay. So when I said that's good. When I said everything about this shouldn't happen, well, the caveat is but for something egregious, and egregious would equal Ryan's words, fundamentally unfair. So the NFLPA, Elliott, and a lot of lawyers, I'm told there were 7 lawyers in there. There were 3 from Winston & Strawn, Jeffrey Kessler's firm, 3 from the union, and 2 from Elliott's private attorneys. That's 8, I guess. Elliott had 8 lawyers, only 2 of which he pays for. The union pays for all the others. So anyway, they made the argument, I guess very forcefully and successfully, that the NFL's procedures were fundamentally unfair. I'm sure some people have read. Ryan, did you figure out what was so unfair about the procedure? Whose testimony did they leave out in the appeal? In the appeal, they never asked for the complaining witness. Not only never asked for her, but denied her as a defense witness. And more importantly, again, the nuts and bolts of this case, there are a lot of investigators involved in what Elliott did or didn't do. There was one investigator, Ms. Roberts, working for the NFL, that interviewed the complaining witness. Her name was Tiffany Thompson, I believe. Interviewed her several times. Came back to the NFL, her bosses, and said she was not credible. She was not allowed to present her case to the commissioner, and she was not allowed to be called as a witness in the appeal. Now, I saw that. I have to admit, I said that doesn't sound great, but I still don't think this judge in Texas will overturn the decision, because of so much deference. That's a key word here, deference to the arbitrator. Courts, like I say, it shouldn't be in court. Well, if it does get to court, the judge is going to say, well, we're going to defer to the arbitrator unless it's egregious, it's fundamentally unfair. I thought the fact that they didn't include this woman who interviewed Thompson, thought she was not credible, she was a lower level on the chain of command in the NFL, I just thought, okay, but that wouldn't cause a reversal. But it did. So the judge agreed with the union, with Elliott, with Elliott's multitude of attorneys, and said, you know what? This is not fair. I understand the judge is saying, I got to be deferential, but this is egregious. This is beyond the pale. So the only way to look at that is, man, did the NFL screw this up? I mean, that's the only way to look at this. They did a year-long investigation, and they have a judge from outside the CBA say that was fundamentally unfair. Wow. That is a pretty strong rebuke to Commissioner Power, which we don't see. We hardly see ever in this course. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, and I got a lot of this on Twitter from people. Texas judge, Cowboys fan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if that's the case, he's going to have problems on appeal. But you'd like to think this was a well-reasoned opinion. And what jumps out at the opinion is those two words, fundamentally unfair. So you go into a state, federal district court in Texas with the presumption, strong presumption, that the NFL will win this because courts don't want to get involved in private CBAs. Courts defer to the arbitrator. Courts are going to allow Commissioner Power. It's in the collective bargaining agreement, blah, blah, blah. And we get a stunning result on Friday afternoon where Ezekiel Elliott is allowed to play. We knew he was allowed to play last Sunday night, but he will continue to play until this is resolved. As Ryan said, you know, courts don't work on sports schedules. They don't care. And everyone knows about courts. They take a while. But the NFL has asked for an emergency stay by this week, which I don't think they're going to get, but I've been wrong, to keep the suspension going, so we'll know that by Friday. But assuming they don't get that, we've got Elliott versus NFL on the dockets for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals with no date. No, as Ryan said, we're probably looking at 2018. So he plays, but he could still be suspended, right? He plays, assuming we have a court date in 18. Elliott plays. We have a court. If the Fifth Circuit overrules this court last week, suspension's back on. Not for 2017, because that's gone. 2018. When, I'm putting my agent hat on now, when Elliott's making more money. So 6 games in 18 will cost him a lot more than 6 games in 17. So if I'm the agent, maybe I do want him to serve it out this year, because he's going to make more money serving it out this year than next year. I mean, these are all the kind of spinning things that go on here. Ashley.
Is it possible, like, I know it's going to take a while, but isn't it possible that his suspension will be implemented like later in the season, in which case, as opposed to sitting out the first 6 games, you're now looking at the playoffs?
Right.
The last 6 games, which of course would be more.
Right, that's going to be interesting if the Fifth Circuit comes back and says, we're going to hear this November 5th, right? Not 18. So, Ashley, you're advising Ezekiel Elliott. You tell him to give up the fight? If you think your odds are that you're going to lose, and we're going to talk about the Brady case, which is now the precedent for favoring the league rather than the player, tell the player to give up the fight, serve the suspension. If you have a hearing date in, say, end of October, they'll rule by mid-November.
It's worth talking about, definitely.
Yeah. But of course, I'm sure he thinks he's going to win. Yeah.
Does it matter anymore what he wants? Is the Players Association?
That's a good question. I mentioned all the lawyers. You know, he's got two lawyers from where he grew up in St. Louis that have been with him a long time, I guess, that know him from childhood. This is what happens. Sometimes the agents and the union, agents, attorneys, and the union don't line up. The union sees this as a fight against Commissioner Power, much bigger than Elliott, right? So Elliott is just caught in the crossfire. He's just a name to them. Now, he's a big name, so it gets a lot of attention and publicity. But you're right, the agents and the player have their own views. And, I mean, the bottom line is, like any attorney-client relationship, Elliott's the client. And Elliott can tell not only his private attorneys, but the union, this is what I want to do. I just think they have him convinced, as they did with Brady, he's going to win all the way through. You know, what's the other stunning part of this to me, and this was talked a lot when I was with the Packers this weekend, is the attitude here of the Cowboys. And what is that? Anyone? How do the Cowboys feel about this? Or maybe the question is, how should the Cowboys feel about this? Whose side are the Cowboys on? Anyone?
They're on Zeke's side.
And who should they be on?
Probably the NFL.
They are the NFL.
Yeah.
They're one of 32 branch offices, basically.
Commissioner works for them. So.
Right. That is unique. That they've been not only not impartial, but they've been on Zeke's side in this. Now, people know Jerry Jones. He's probably the most visible owner in sports. He's not shy, right? So he's going to speak his mind. And he wants his best player out there. But I'm sure it's I could tell in Green Bay. I mean, it's rubbing some people at the league office a little bit briskly. Like, you're supposed to be on our side.
Isn't this also
Jack?
a long-term financial play for them maybe? Because if they don't stick up for their own player, then they're not going to want to attract certain free agents, and then the Cowboy brand diminishes. So
Yeah.
he doesn't really have too much of a choice.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same play. Again, so much of this is a replay of Brady, where we remember Robert Kraft being furious at the NFL and supporting his player. And that's a replay here. You do wonder, in their heart of hearts, in the back of their minds, in their private rooms, are they really supporting the player or not? Or, even more cynically, are they calling Roger Goodell and saying, I got to do this publicly? You know? But I support you. It's a really tough thing. As we talk later in this class about all the team league dynamics, you know, you own a team, your player allegedly did some very uncomfortable things, and you're supporting him. At the expense of losing relationships maybe at the league side too. But as Jack said, you know, again, we don't, we understand what's going on here with talent. And as mentioned last week, the Cowboys cut a player last month, not as talented, who was charged with shoplifting, and the charge was wrong, right? They cut that kid charged with shoplifting, and it was a false charge. But then they're like, yeah, okay, we're not taking him back. Because he wasn't, you know, the talent level that would warrant that. So it's all situational. But so many dynamics in play here. You have the timing of this with Elliott not even signing a contract when he had the misbehavior. You have ownership supporting the player, not the league. And then you have this astounding result. We will continue to watch it. Hopefully we'll know by Friday whether Ryan is correct that we're not going to see this again in court till 18, or maybe Ashley's right that we see this in the fall, and we've got a real decision to make on Elliott if you're representing him. Because, and I've been wrong, I think this will go the other way in appeals court. I just think the appeals court will say, I'm sorry that investigator wasn't called as an appeal witness, but the collective bargaining is what it is. Commissioner power is what it is. Typically, circuit courts are more pro-business, which would mean pro-NFL, pro-conservative. And this Texas Fifth Circuit is known for that as well. So if you put odds on this, you got to favor the NFL in the next round, which would mean Elliott will serve a suspension at some point. Unless the union appeals to the United States Supreme Court, which I don't think is going to happen. Okay, any questions on this? Keep a lookout this week for a decision from the Fifth Circuit about an emergency stay to restate the suspension while the bigger case goes on. I don't think that'll happen. And then for a schedule of, you know how it is, they have a schedule for petitioner briefings and respondent briefings. And by the time it gets to court, it'll be a while. Okay. I keep referencing the same thing happening 2 years ago. It's probably we should talk about it. This word that dominated sports law and business for 2 years. In fact, the University of New Hampshire has a course called Deflategate, an entire semester-long course. Again, that's in New England. Those are hometown fans, right? Who's going to talk about this? Colin? Yeah.
So I have the district court's opinion on this one.
Okay, give us the background first. I mean, everyone knows it basically, but.
Yeah, so the major background was that following the AFC championship game between the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots, the Colts accused the Patriots and Tom Brady and some of the staff of under-deflating the footballs. After an interception, they tested one of the balls that they obtained, and actually all the balls that they had, and it was below the required PSI.
PSI is pressure, like in a tire and also in a ball. Listen, I've been around football 25 years. Before that, I never heard of PSI. So this was new to me. I didn't know there were PSI gauges that you had to play with. Your ball had to be at, but we found out. Go ahead.
Yeah, so following this game, the NFL ran an investigation, which was known as the Wells report.
Right. And who was Wells?
The Wells was the head of a law firm.
Right.
And with the help of the executive vice president, general counsel, Jeff Nash.
Yep.
They created a report, they investigated, they found that two of the personnel, they had reasonable evidence to suggest that two of the Patriot personnel had tampered with the footballs, and also Tom Brady was basically, they kept saying was generally aware that
Yeah.
he had knowledge of the tampering.
Okay, so to fill in Colin again, Wells is, you know my saying, there will be lawyers. There were a lot of lawyers here. Ted Wells, one of the lead partners at Paul Weiss, big firm in New York, very well credentialed. The NFL hires him. Remember with Pete Rose, the commissioner hired John Dowd, a big Washington lawyer, to run an investigation. Well, this time the NFL hires Ted Wells, big time name in law, hires him to run an investigation. In some ways, you applaud the NFL. They're taking it out of house, so it's kind of independent. and they're bringing in a big-time lawyer to run an investigation. And by the way, we talked about Ray Rice last week. I neglected to mention, after the fiasco of the Ray Rice discipline after the punch video, the NFL did the same thing. Does anyone know who they hired to run that report? He's now running a report about the President of the United States and Russia. Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI. That's who the NFL had write a report about the Rice case, and he's now on to working for lower level stuff about, like the President, which is less important than the NFL. Anyway, Wells is hired. Paul Weiss, you can imagine the bill. He's got several lawyers working on this for months. And they produced this, I don't know how long the report was, and that was the basis for discipline. Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, this was one of the main reasons for Goodell suspending Tom Brady for 4 games, and he's got a $1 million fine for the Patriots and loss of 2 draft picks. That was the first match. It was pretty major. After a little bit of time, the Patriots accepted their.
Okay, so back to the Wells report. You talked about it. The generally aware is what drove, obviously, Patriot fans crazy. It seems like a low standard. There was no direct evidence. We got used to direct evidence with seeing Ray Rice punch his girlfriend. There was no direct evidence of this, of course. There were circumstantial evidence about one of these 2 guys named there running into a bathroom before the game with a bag of balls. There was circumstantial evidence of Tom Brady texting one of these guys, Jastrzemski, after the game when the heat was coming down, texting several times, phone calls several times. They really hadn't texted or phone called in months before that. Their rationale was, we're getting ready to play the Super Bowl, we need to talk about, getting ready and all that stuff. The Ted Wells did not believe them. There was this guy named the Deflator. Their rationale was he used to gain and lose a lot of weight. That's their story, why he was called that. So anyway, there was, again, no direct evidence of Tom Brady deflating footballs or these guys, but they made a case based on circumstantial evidence, just like a criminal case. You're not going to see the guy commit the crime, but you have circumstantial evidence. And of course, Patriot fans, Patriot players, and the Patriots themselves went nuts after this. But as Colin said, the Patriots gave up the fight on their side. They got fined the money and the draft picks, but they decided not to pursue an appeal. And by the way, they would be just like a player, right? They would appeal to the commissioner, because commissioner power would extend to them, even though, as we'll talk about with the next cases, commissioner works for them. It's kind of a weird situation. But Mr. Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, decided in the best interests of football to just sort of give up the fight on the team end. So now we'll get back to Colin on the player end. What did Tom Brady do?
He appealed his decision to the NFL, and in the attempt to do that, trying to get Goodell off as the person he came to.
Right.
Which failed. Trying to get interviews with or testimony from both Wells and Pash, which he was not allowed. And he wanted documentation, which he wasn't allowed. So when Goodell came out that he upheld the suspension, Brady and the NFL Players Association appealed to the district court, and the district court ended up actually vacating the suspension based off of most of what was just said about how the first thing that they actually decided it on was they kind of talked a lot about inadequate notice of discipline and misconduct. So Goodell based the decision to suspend him for 4 games off of what he thought was similar to the suspension for steroid use. Brady appealed to that and said that he had no actual notice on what he would be suspended for the actual misconduct he made. And then also appealed based off of not getting the documentation and not being able to interview Pastor Wells.
What was the rationale for Goodell suspending Brady?
He actually, as many of the other cases we saw, based it all off of detriment to the NFL.
Conduct detrimental.
Conduct
Right.
detrimental.
So this is that key phrase that commissioners and teams, frankly, I used it. It's a catch-all when someone screws up with behavior-wise. Conduct detrimental. So the reason why Commissioner Goodell was suspending Tom Brady was not necessarily about equipment. There are rules about equipment violations. And the maximum fine for an equipment violation is $25,000. And usually it's about your socks, your shirt hanging out, your socks not being pulled up, your pants not being buttoned up. We had a guy, it happens. So Brady's lawyers, Jeffrey Kessler, who's the same lawyer who represented Peterson, Brady, and now Ezekiel Elliott, outside counsel of the NFLPA. He's been here for some of our symposia. He made the argument, hey, appeal and at the lower court level, this is a equipment violation. We will happily pay the $25,000. But I think his point was, even if you find that he deflated footballs, not admitting that he did, but if you judge find that yes, he deflated all these footballs, we will pay $25,000 per football, or whatever it is. The commissioner and the NFL lawyers, they knew that to get the result they wanted, this can't be an equipment violation. So it was very clear from the beginning, the fight was the one side, Brady's side, saying equipment violation, the NFL side saying something a lot bigger, conduct detrimental, and the other phrase, which we talked about at the beginning of this section, is integrity of the game. Brady had violated the integrity of the game. As Colin said, they compared it to a steroid use because you're cheating. Basically, that's the word. And because you're cheating, you're violating the integrity of the game. And the 4-game suspension was equated to the 4-game suspension for testing positive for anabolics. So I sat through all these court hearings on Judge Berman in New York, and it was all about equipment violation on one hand, conduct detrimental on the other. And it's amazing how we have deja vu, because the exact same thing happened. You go into it, just like you're saying with Elliott, okay, this court will never overturn this appeal, right? Collective bargaining agreement, private agreement, never going to have courts interfere with that. Goodell's got all this power. And just like this September, that September 2015, Judge Berman, and I was in that courtroom, he was very strident with the NFL lawyers and almost sympathetic to Brady. But for those of you who've seen court proceedings, you can never count on that to predict a result, right? It's always, maybe he's just, playing devil's advocate. Who the hell knows? But I sat in those court hearings, I'm like, wow, this guy does not like the NFL. And lo and behold, what happened in court turned out to be the exact result. Judge Berman ruled for Brady and did exactly what this Mazant did, the judge in Texas, and say, you know what? It's fundamentally unfair. In that case, in this case with Elliott, it was witnesses that didn't testify. In that case, the same thing like Colin talked about, attorneys for the NFL not allowed to testify. Wells not allowed to testify. And the NFL said, Your Honor, this is not about replaying what happened. This is about procedure, right? It's about, you shouldn't get involved in the CBA. It's all about process, civil procedure. It's not about facts. Same thing the NFL said with the Elliott case. And in both cases, the judge is basically saying, you guys screwed up. You, the NFL, you screwed this up. There's a money quote from Berman that basically said the NFL dispensed its own brand of industrial justice. Same thing just happened last week. This Judge Berman called the commissioner out, gave him a harsh rebuke. This is ridiculous. Big blow to commissioner power. Okay, this has happened now, again, 2 Septembers out of 3 years. And it's stunning as a sports lawyer because these things should never happen. The only thing you can say is the NFL's investigative procedures gave rise to these stunning results. Why weren't these witnesses allowed to testify in the appeal? And Jeffrey Kessler did a nice job in highlighting all this to the district court judges. Okay, 2 years ago, the NFL lawyers, after all the hysteria, you know, I'm on the air on ESPN, and they're texting me saying, "You got to say we're not worried. We feel confident on appeal." Literally, they're texting me saying, "Don't get caught up in this, Andrew. We'll be fine on appeal." I tried to play both sides. I had to just say that this was a stunning result. So they appeal. And just what we just talked about with Ryan and Ashley, when is the appeal date? So this was September. They're allowing Brady to play. Okay, September of 2015. They're allowing Brady to play. When will he be suspended, if at all? And then sometime in mid-September to late September, we find out hearing date March 2016. So he plays that whole year. The Patriots lose to the Broncos in the championship. Court hearing in March of 2016. That, again, I attended, and it was the diametric opposite. So now we're in front of 3 circuit court judges in New York City Court of Appeals, Second Circuit. And from the jump, it was the exact opposite. The judges were strident and nasty towards Brady's side. Just as nasty as Berman was towards the NFL, these new judges never mentioned Berman, never mentioned the lower court case. They were after the NFLPA. Because part of the facts that Colin didn't mention is that Brady destroyed his phone, the one that allegedly had these texts. That never really came up in the lower court. Right away, these judges in the upper court are saying to Kessler, the lawyer for the NFLPA, for Brady, saying, couldn't the commissioner have suspended him just for that destroyed phone? Couldn't he have added more games? And again, the rationale for the phone was he's a celebrity and he's married to a celebrity and he destroys his phones all the time. But he didn't destroy his phone before the time and he didn't destroy his phone after. So there was some curiosity about that destroyed phone, which would have had texts with the equipment manager about, you know, all this stuff right around that time. Anyway, they went after him. And they were just saying, the commissioner has this power. Why are we here? That was March. I think it was late April, May, early May. We got a decision. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals overrules Judge Berman in lower court. Brady's suspension reinstated. The Court of Appeals, as the NFL lawyers said it would, went back to commissioner power and gave a stunning opinion basically calling out Brady for taking this as far as he did. Like, wait, the commissioner has this power. That judge below us shouldn't have granted Brady this. In other words, there was nothing that court saw as egregious, as fundamentally unfair. It endorsed commissioner power. In a way, it not only endorsed commissioner power, it strengthened it. Okay, so the Brady case that had so much promise for players in the early portions of the case and showed some problems with the NFL's investigative procedures, at the end of the day, turned out to be a big win for the league, for commissioner power. So after all the twists and turns of Brady over 2 years, he served a suspension last year, 2016. Obviously, they won the championship despite that. And commissioner power is stronger than ever, we thought, until Ezekiel Elliott. So here we are again. If there was no Ezekiel Elliott, I walk into this class, I say, we got the Brady case, Second Circuit. That's the second highest level of court in the country. They have given a strong endorsement of commissioner power. We're at the height of commissioner power right now, even with the NFL messing up some of the investigative process. They can do what they want, basically. But now, I don't know. Because another Judge Berman just happened. His name is Judge Mazant in Sherman, Texas. It just happened again. So the NFL is texting me the same stuff. Andrew, we're confident on appeal. Brady all over again. That's literally their words. It's Brady all over again. We'll win. So when we hear about the Fifth Circuit, we'll be following it. And the NFL is pretty confident. They better hope, because if we have an opinion from a circuit court for the player, now commissioner power is all up in the air. We're going to need another case to go to the Supreme Court to decide between the circuits, right? Because then we're going to have or the NFL would actually appeal to the Supreme Court. They have the money. They want the precedent. Okay, whatever side, whatever league you're on, whatever management side you're on, you are really hoping for a win by the NFL against Ezekiel Elliott. Because if the NFL loses, we don't know where we are with commissioner power. More importantly, we don't know where we are with players and lawyers taking this out of the CBA and going to court. That's a scary proposition for all teams, all leagues, all commissioners, the management side. Because now you can't count on your CBA. That's really scary. I think Elliott will lose. But we never know. But we'll see the tea leaves. The tea leaves in the Brady court at the lower level were absolutely towards Brady. The tea leaves in the Circuit Court of Appeals were absolutely towards the commissioner. And it played out exactly that way. We'll see about the Fifth Circuit. And again, some of you may know civil procedure a lot better than I do. The way I understand it is just like in the New York court, the Second Circuit, the Fifth Circuit will somehow, you'll be randomly assigned 3 judges from the Fifth Circuit to hear the case of a panel of, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 judges. And they will become these, because of sports and because of what's going on, they'll become very famous, these judges. Okay, any questions? Extraordinary results. Again, for the fan part of this, people just want to see, is Elliott playing or is he not playing? I get it, but that's not what we talk about, right? We talk about the deeper issue behind it, and that's what we've been discussing. Yeah.
Is the, assuming the league wins, is the CBA language likely to be negotiated over in the next CBA agreement?
I think so. I think the whole thing about this is Commissioner Power used, according to the union, in a much wieldier fashion by Commissioner Goodell than other commissioners. So is it going to be a bargaining issue? And I think you bring up the point that even if the NFLPA wins another round in court, you still have a CBA that grants the commissioner a lot of power. So the only way to change that is through collective bargaining. We can talk about it, but I think there are a lot of issues that are going to go into the next round of bargaining. Whether that one's a high priority or not, we'll see. There are a lot of things that the union would like to get. And frankly, there are a lot of players out there that probably don't want it to be a big issue because, hey, it's like affects 5 players a year that screw up somehow. 10 players a year, we're not going to make that a big issue. But from a legal point of view, they would like to restrict that. And I've said this all along, we have a commissioner in the NFL who cares deeply about this stuff. Okay? Role modeling. And I said it about Elliott last week. I just think when that picture came out of him pulling down that woman's top, that didn't go into necessarily the decision, but that was like, I just think they said, well, we got to do something here. This is an image we can't have. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Image is everything. Any questions? Okay, we will now toggle back 50 years and talk about the historical aspect away from the current events aspect of all this. We'll be back after a break. When Nick was asking about sort of we're talking about Jerry Jones and we're talking about team versus league. I guess the interesting issue with commissioner discipline is always what to do, not so much with players. We understand, like I set up always this paradigm of management versus labor. We kind of understand disputes when they're between those two sides. That's what happens in legal disputes all the time, employer disputes, employee disputes, labor versus management, players versus owners. The labor in sports is always players. But there's an interesting line of cases in sports law about management versus management. So we heard from Colin about the Patriots' decision not to sue the commissioner about their discipline, but that has not always been the case. So we have issues of the commissioner fighting with owners. And again, we've set up the flow chart. Team owners pay and hire commissioners. It's almost, if you akin to something you would suspect like a board of directors and a CEO. So you look at it in that sense, the executive board hires the CEO, figures out what the CEO is paid, and they tend to be, on the same page, but they fight. Now here's fights between team owners and the commissioner. And again, think about this paradigm where you're suing the person who, on the flow chart, is your employee for disciplining you, on the flow chart, his employer. It's a very strange dynamic. So we go back to kind of the first real case about what commissioner power is in regard to owners and teams rather than players. And that's this Finley versus Kuhn case. Kuhn was the commissioner of baseball. Who's got this? Your name is Natalie, right?
So the issue here was if the commissioner had the power to discipline player assignments. Finley was the owner of the Oakland A's, and before the trade deadline, he reassigned 3 players, 2 to the Red Sox and 1 to the Yankees. And at that time, the commissioner Kuhn said that that was not in the best interest of baseball. Then he sued him in the district court to see if the commissioner actually had the power to do that.
Okay.
Was it acting in bad faith or moral turpitude?
Okay, so to echo the facts again from Natalie, we're talking about a transaction. In baseball, unlike other sports, you can have these cash transactions. It's just an anachronism of baseball that's been around forever. You can actually trade cash. There's no salary cap, so it won't screw up the salary cap. Baseball is the one sport without a cap. You can trade cash. So Finley was owner of the Oakland A's, and this is way before your time, even my time. The A's won a couple championships back in the early 70s. And what they did after that, Finley, the owner, kind of a strange guy. He's like, okay, we got our championships. I'm going to sell off my best players. And he sold them to who else, right? Yankees and Red Sox. Nothing's changed. Always Yankees and Red Sox. He sold them off to the Yankees and Red Sox. A total of $3.5 million. You know, if you extrapolate that to this, I don't know, that's $30 million maybe. This was 1972. And he wanted to build with young players. So he made that trade. And lo and behold, we'll obviously talk about how this would happen today after we talk about this case, but lo and behold, the commissioner steps in. Bowie Kuhn, commissioner of baseball, disapproves the trade. Basically a trade for cash, which is allowed, but he disapproves it. And why, Natalie, did he disapprove it?
There were 4 major reasons. He said that it would debilitate the A's club, that it would lessen the competitive balance of the entire baseball system, that there were present unsettled circumstances of baseball's reserve system, and that it would bypass the usual methods of player development and acquisition.
Okay. So of those 4 reasons, that 2-word mantra of this course is always going to be in play here, competitive balance. The one thing a commissioner strives for is always having a competitively balanced product. You don't want lopsided games because people don't watch, no one turns on the network doesn't pay as much for the product. So it's always going to be competitive balance. Kuhn is saying this flies in the face of competitive balance and weakens the A's tremendously. Which, if you're just a fan sitting out there, you say, okay, they sold their 3 best players, of course they're weaker. But, we'll talk about happens all the time. Anyway, Kuhn stepped in, and Finley said, what are you doing? Finley is like, it's my team. It's my team. And Finley brought suit. So we are back to a dispute, but it's not between player and commissioner. It's between owner and commissioner, and commissioner power is at stake. So what happened?
There were 7 major causes of action
Yep.
The first 4 were dismissed in the district court in September, and then the rest were ruled in favor of the commissioner, and then his counterclaim was also granted. And in the last, this actual case that we had, they affirmed the holdings of the district court and dismissed the case because they found that the commissioner had broad authority and he acted in good faith. So he was allowed to disapprove of any assignments.
Okay, so as Natalie said, this worked its way up to this court. We don't concern ourselves with some of the lower opinions, but basically this is a big, big win for Commissioner Power. He could tell the owner, I can do this. You have a court finding, you see there, Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, acted in the manner which he determined to be the best interest of baseball. This is that phrase that Judge Landis started with the first commissioner case, and it's a phrase that continues throughout sports, throughout today. Best interest of baseball. Whose best interest of baseball? Commissioner. If he or she thinks it's in the best interest of baseball, then it is, basically. So the commissioner avoided the trade based on the best interest of baseball. The court says it's not their jurisdiction to decide whether he should or shouldn't. If he says, that's my point again, if Kuhn says it's in the best interest of baseball, we as a court are not going to jump in. This is back to what we've been talking about all class. Court's not going to jump in on sports. Court doesn't know sports. If the leader of this sport says you're screwing up one team, it's not good for baseball, who are we, the court, to say, we don't agree with that? Court doesn't know who these players are. It's not their business. So, case dismissed, as Natalie said. Finley loses. This is a huge win for Commissioner Power because it's basically doing something that should be in the team's province, right? What has gone on in sports like this since? Anyone? Jack?
This might not be right, but is this when like the MLBPA actually vetoed A-Rod signing with the Red Sox, like whenever that year was?
That's a little different because that's more a player contract issue, but another Major League Baseball situation. What's happened with a certain team has done this like 3 times. Yeah.
The Marlins?
Florida Marlins. They won 2 championships, I believe, and after each one, sold off their best players. This has happened. And the commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, I don't think there was even a word about him stepping in. Right? So how do we rationalize that? What we see is that back in the 70s, maybe sports was different. Maybe the commissioner said, I don't want this to happen on my watch. I don't want a team to be noticeably weakened by a trade enhancing the always powerful Red Sox and Yankees. Hey, that happens in sports. Commissioners haven't stepped in modern times, but they did here, and they were endorsed by the court to do so. So we look at this case as a huge win for Commissioner Power, but we wonder, could that happen today? If a baseball team did what Finley did today, what would we hear from that team's general manager or owner? What rationale? On team building. What's that? I could hear tank. If it was tanking, the league might get involved. That's a recent thing. We'll come back to that. But what we'd hear is what every GM says that has a young team, right? We're building through the draft. We're building through the farm system, baseball, farm system. Baseball's big about we're building through the farm system. We're not signing big-time free agents. We're getting, you know, all that stuff. And this phrase that's caught on the past 15 years, Moneyball. Okay, Moneyball is identifying talent that you wouldn't think are the names. So if you have a Billy Beane in Oakland or the other team's doing Moneyball, you know, a commissioner could, in this case, with this precedent, say, what are you doing? No, I'm going to step in. You can't trade your best players and then build through these no-names. That doesn't happen anymore. Especially the small markets. That's what's going on here, because if you look at sports right now, especially baseball, the smaller markets are at a disadvantage because of the lack of a salary cap. You have a team like the Dodgers with a $300 million payroll. You have other teams with $80, $90 million payrolls playing in the same sport. You know, with a cap system that I was part of in the NFL, we never had disparity more than, I don't know, right now you probably have a couple payrolls at like 180 million, a couple payrolls at like 130, 140, maybe 40 to 50 million disparity max. In baseball, we had $200 million disparities. Think about that. And they're supposed to compete. One team's got a roster worth 100 million, one team's got a roster worth 300 million. That's hard. But we don't see commissioners stepping in. And what baseball teams have to do, and I experienced this in Green Bay because it's not the most geographically desirable place in the world, you got to get your players young and sign them up and make sure they don't see the tantalizing choices in free agency. I mean, as someone who studies contracts, I remember this Tampa Bay Rays guy, Evan Longoria? What's his name? Evan Longoria, yeah. He had played six Major League Baseball games. 6. And they gave him an 8-year contract. 6 games. So what they said was, we got something special here. We are going to get this guy locked up because if he even sniffs the prospect of free agency, we got no chance. That's what happens in baseball because everyone's so afraid of the Red Sox and Dodgers and Yankees and Cubs stealing their players once they got an option to go somewhere. So this is what you have to do in sports with the competitive balance situation. You just, even with all the competitive balance rules, you have to be able to compete with the bigger markets. I did it in Green Bay all the time. I had a player show promise early in his career. Lock him up. Lock him up early because you don't want him to see free agency. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about free agency. But baseball is a lot of examples of what's gone on with Finley. And it's just, it's something we say, well, okay, that's a great decision for Commissioner Power, but it would never happen. Teams sell off players because they're going to build young. They don't think they can sign them in free agency. They want to get something before they go. Okay. Any questions about the Finley case? So again, I don't, obviously this was before my time too, but I guess those guys, Joe Rudy, those players sold to the Yankees and Red Sox had to go back. That's awkward, right? Finley didn't want them. They made too much money. So they had to go back, and the trade was rescinded. Let me see something here. Ah, yes. So I just said this never happens. Well, I was wrong. We have someone assigned here, Sarah? Your name is? Christine. Before I get to Christine, this is exactly what we're talking about again. So it never happens in modern times where a commissioner would step in on a team transaction. But it did. Not in baseball, in basketball. 2011, I believe. Major case of, oh my God, the commissioner stopping a trade? Just like the Finley case, 1972, it's really happening. Christine.
Well, I think this was like a little different because
Yeah.
so David Stern was the commissioner at the NBA at the time, but Chris Paul was playing for the Hornets, who I think due to like financial troubles and like the freeze, was actually bought by the NBA.
Right.
So technically the commissioner was the owner.
Well, that's the distinction. Yeah, go ahead.
But for the most part, the front office was making all of the decisions until this point, when Chris Paul was a part of a trade between the Hornets, the Lakers, and the Rockets. But specifically, Chris Paul was going to the Lakers, if I'm correct.
Right.
And at the last moment, acting as owner, although he was commissioner, vetoed the trade.
Right.
There's like many different theories as to why he did it. Some say it was like owner pressure, but leading into what I think we're talking about later is this idea of like super teams.
Right.
Chris Paul went to the Lakers, they're going to be super, super strong, and they win all the time. And this was like the Hornets' lead player, like their best player, I think, at the time.
Right.
And so that was also an issue, but I'm pretty sure a few months later he got traded to the Clippers, and they let that happen, so
Right.
I don't really know.
Well, even enhancing the Lakers is one part of it, but the converse of that, of course, was weakening the Hornets. And just like the rationale of the Finley, commissioners saying you can't really weaken. Commissioners are more concerned with truly weakening franchises than enhancing others. That, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So before we get to the ownership situation that distinguishes this from the Finley case, it's the same deal. Finley's concern, tremendous weakening of the A's. Stern's concern, tremendous weakening of the Hornets, who at that time were New Orleans Hornets, now it's Charlotte Hornets. What's New Orleans called now? Pelicans. So same language from 1970-something to 2011 about the weakening of a franchise. So at first blush, as Christine said, this looks exactly like what Commissioner Kuhn did to Finley 40 years ago. Stopping a trade. A commissioner stepping in on a team decision. As Natalie said, the Hornets management worked on this a long time. Got some big old trade with the Lakers, getting all these players back. I think it was a three-way trade. But anyway, Paul would end up on the Lakers with Kobe. It was going to be this monster team. And all of a sudden, not so fast. Chris Paul's not going to the Lakers. So everything we talked about so far ends up exactly where we ended up with Kuhn and Finley. Commissioner avoiding a trade. How can they do that? Well, it was blessed in court 40 years ago. Would this end up in court? Well, what happened was David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, distinguished this. As Christine said, this was not about commissioner power. This was about owner power. Why? Because the owner of the Hornets at the time was the commissioner. You have this unique little time in sports where the Hornets went into receivership, bad management, faulty ownership financially, and the league took it over. So the league decides we're not going to allow the team we own to make this trade because it weakens us so much, even though the management of that team made the trade happily. Happily. Whatever they were getting back from the Lakers is what they wanted. The GM and the coaches. I'm sure they're like, all right, we're giving up Chris Paul, but look what we get back. No. No. And there you get into the cynicism in the debate, like Christine said, where other owners pressuring Stern. Right? Other owners is always a big part of this. You got to stop this. And because of this unique ownership structure, he was able to stop it using the role of owner rather than commissioner. So we can be cynical and say this is all about commissioner power. He's doing exactly what Kuhn did in 1972. He is distinguishing, saying, I'm an owner, I'm not a commissioner. You read the language there. Since the NBA purchased the Hornets, final responsibility lies with the commissioner's office. There it is. It's not about commissioner, it's about ownership. All decisions are made on the basis of what's best interest of the Hornets. In the trade for Chris Paul, we decided, free from influence of other NBA owners, okay? So trying to get ahead of that criticism, that the team was better served with Chris in a Hornets uniform than by the outcome of the terms of the trade. So after I said after the Finley case this wouldn't happen today, well, it did. It did happen, but it was distinguished because of this unique ownership situation. Okay, we can have our own personal views on whether it was just a ruse by Stern to void the trade because our other owners were complaining. The fact he put that language in there is really trying to be defensive about that. It wasn't the owners telling me to do it, it was me. And I'm an owner of the Hornets. Chris Paul goes back to the Hornets. All those players coming to the Hornets go back to the Lakers. And then later on, I don't know the timing, as Christine said, Chris Paul was traded to LA, but the other team in LA, the Clippers. And that trade was allowed. That was determined that whatever the Clippers, not the Lakers, but whatever the Clippers gave back to the Hornets was sufficient for owner Commissioner Stern to say, we're okay with that. Okay? So we had this situation 5 years ago, and it was really strange because we're in modern times now. We're not in the Finley era where commissioners void trades. And he said, would it have happened if there was no receivership with the Hornets? No. But he had a unique ability to stop that trade. So again, Chris Paul, one of the better players in basketball, could have changed the dynamic of the NBA. All these years. Lakers could have been a lot better. Clippers could have been a lot worse. Hornets, who knows? Or Pelicans. So Commissioner Stern changed the force of those three franchises. Okay, and in a little bit we will talk about the super teams. It's the same issue. Should a commissioner get involved? With team decisions. The last thing, if I worked for a team for 10 years, the last thing you want to feel like is the league getting in your business. Now, we understand league business and rules and CBA and all that, but you never want to feel like a league is telling you what to do with players, right? With how you build your team. Imagine a league saying you shouldn't trade that guy, he's good. You would tell the league, screw you, we do our own thing. Okay, but that's what happened. Any questions about this Chris Paul situation? It was chaos, I remember. It was just everyone asking exactly what we talk about. How can they do this? The team negotiated a trade. How can they do this? Stern used this loophole. Didn't use it when he got traded to the Clippers, who were a bad team, but used it when he got traded to the Lakers, who were a good team. Does anyone see this happening today? Apart from the super team discussion, the LeBron Durant stuff, does anyone see a need for a commissioner to step in to team trades? Again, putting aside the super team discussion for a second, is there anything that would warrant, in your mind, a commissioner stepping in on team player decisions? Yeah.
Maybe like collusion between owners or something like that.
If you were able to find that, sure. And of course, what I'm talking about here is in the news every day as well, is Kaepernick. Okay? Collusion is the charge by people who support Kaepernick. The question is, should a league get involved on the other side here in maybe calling teams and saying someone should sign that guy? We don't see that happening. What people are worried about is a league has gotten involved and people say not sign that guy. I think that would be a hard case to make too. But again, Kaepernick is a polarizing subject. I'm pretty clear on my view of it. I think there's just a lot of gray area here that's not black and white. On the one side of the pendulum, is he being blackballed, colluded against? I say no. On the other side of the pendulum, do I think that teams are considering him for a lot more reasons than his football ability? I say absolutely yes. So somewhere in that, he's not being signed up. There's no question he's not being treated like just a normal football player. But collusion is a strong allegation. But we're pretty clear, with what Roger Goodell's been asked about and answered on this question, he's not going to step in. In fact, he's probably hearing from constituents that really don't want Kaepernick to play. But I don't think he's stepping in and saying, don't sign him. The other area is what we've been talking about with Rice and Elliott and all this, is conduct. Should leagues step in when there's conduct? When teams are about to sign a player who's got bad conduct? Does anyone think leagues should step in there? And maybe even void a signing for a bad character. Anyone? Yeah.
I mean, isn't that served just with the year-long suspensions? Like, no one's going to touch Josh Gordon.
But those are suspensions after they become employees.
I mean,
Yeah, no one's going to. You're saying it happens de facto.
Yeah.
Ray Rice hasn't been signed. If he were, would the league step in? Should they?
I don't think that.
Like, say it was soon after.
Maybe immediately after they would have, but I mean, just given the facts now, I don't think they would. There's been a lot of issues that have happened since
Yeah.
with other players.
I think we're at a time in sports where the the commissioners and leagues allow teams to do what they do. We probably won't see a case like Finley or Paul, but you never know. You never know. It could happen again. But it's important, I think, for leagues to defer to teams on player decisions. That's why you hire general managers. That's why you hire front office coaches, etc. Otherwise, it'd be all from the league level. But these are tough decisions because, like any organization, you have to work within a structure. Teams are part of a structure. The structure is a league. Greater good, all those words. But yeah, conduct is always an issue. I was at Green Bay this week, and it reminded me of a story when we talk about domestic violence and player conduct. I think I told this, where the coach really wanted this guy who had a rap sheet. Yeah, it was scary what we were bringing in there. Now, would the league have jumped in there? No. It would have allowed us to do what we were going to do. So it takes a team to decide those kind of things. Okay. In our remaining minutes, I want to do one more case about commissioner power that shows kind of a different outcome. Chicago Cubs versus Vincent. Same dynamic. Club suing commissioner. Team suing league. Really a unique structure here. Who's talking about that? Your name is?
Max.
Max, yeah. It's my son's name. Hey, Max.
Maxwell or Maxwell?
Maxwell. Not you?
No, that's me.
Okay.
Okay, so this was happening at the conclusion of the 1992 season. At that point in time, there was still the American and the National Leagues, but there was only an East and a West, so there wasn't any Central Division. And there was some realignment that was occurring. There were some new franchises that were being brought into the National League, and they were trying to figure out where all of the teams were going to be for the 1993 season. So the National League East, which is where the Chicago Cubs was, they were trying to internally figure things out, but it wasn't going so well. The owners in that division had voted in favor of moving the Cubs to the West, to the National League West by 10-2, but the Cubs opposed that, and based on their own National League constitution, it stipulated that the team couldn't be transferred without that team's permission. So, according to that constitution, the Cubs would be staying put because they didn't want to move. But the commissioner then mandated that the Cubs move from the National League East to the National League West. And this action resulted from the Chicago Cubs ownership and suing the commissioner.
Right.
over that.
Okay, again with the background, you see it there. This was the expansion year. 2 new teams coming into Major League Baseball, Colorado Rockies, Florida Marlins, brand new expansion teams. So Rockies were going to go to the West, Marlins were going to go to the East, and now we're going to assign the Cubs and Cardinals to the West, and the Reds and Braves to the East. So a whole realignment, and just what you see there works and makes sense geographically. You take geography, it's like, okay, that's where they should be. But not so fast, say the Chicago Cubs. And why do the Cubs so want to stay in the East?
So they basically claimed that there was this built-up rivalry with certain teams in that division,
Right.
and that other changes in kind of broadcast times of the games would hurt their franchise.
Right, those 2 reasons, you see them there. The rivalries, of course, that they'd built up over the years, and the TV ratings. Why would TV ratings change if they were in the West?
It would just be, the games would be aired at a different time.
Later.
That the Cubs would argue would be inconvenient to the fans
playing a lot of West Coast teams. It's going to be later times. You're going to have less people watching and get less money out of a broadcast contract with less people watching and lower ratings. So there's obviously a business part to this. They don't like being in the West, being from Chicago, because you're playing a lot of games on the West Coast 2 hours later. So a game would start out there at 8 o'clock. It'd be 10 o'clock in Chicago. You wouldn't get the ratings. So those are the two reasons. So as you said, the Cubs go to court. They sue. The commissioner at the time, Fay Vincent, was someone we talked about when we talked about Rose v. Giamatti. Giamatti passes away from a heart attack. The deputy commissioner was Fay Vincent, and here he is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they challenged the commissioner's action, basically saying we have our own constitution and the commissioner doesn't have any authority to make this change based upon what's in that.
And what did the court say?
Actually, there wasn't an opinion, so there was an article posted on this.
Right.
I didn't go into the court's decision. I did a little bit of extra research, and the Cubs stayed in the National League East from 1992. So at that point, I was only assuming that either they had come to kind of a mutual understanding, or that the courts had ruled in favor of the Cubs.
Yeah, they got an injunction, the Cubs, to stay in the East. And the legal reasoning was, you see these sort of competing language in the Major League Agreement. The commissioner said he had authority under the Major League Agreement, what we've all been talking about, best interests of baseball, basically do what he wants in the best interest, and these would be geographic interests, basically. Whereas the Cubs say you can't transfer teams without club approval. So you have these two competing forces going into court here. The Cubs saying you have to have owner approval to transfer divisions. Commissioner saying I can do what I want, right? And the case precedent to this point has been yes. Best interests of baseball, geography, sure. Well, the district court agreed with the Cubs. The judge found that language above, the no member club transfer without consent, preempted the agreement that talked about best interests. And here is our first case where we see a real limitation on commissioner power. And you see it there. It has to be acts, transactions, and practices, which does not include restructuring divisions. Okay, now that's going to be a hard one to enforce, but commissioner power is limited to acts, practices, and transactions, not the full-fledged power that we've seen from the Rose case, from the Landis case, and just from the Finley case. This is a chipping away at commissioner power unlike we haven't seen before in these historical cases. The Finley versus Vincent case, the Cubs versus Vincent, goes for the team, not the commissioner. So you have a judge that basically says, I don't believe in the best interest with complete breath. I believe in best interest for these three things, acts, practices, transactions, but not for everything. Whereas Vincent probably goes to court saying, okay, well, Kuhn could do whatever he wanted, Landis could do whatever he wanted, Giamatti could do whatever he wanted. Why not me? And again, as I always say, nothing happens in a vacuum. The Cubs, very, very popular team, very strong team, very influential team. Would this have happened if it was the Tampa Bay Rays? I don't know. But the Cubs got their injunction. Vincent didn't fight it. Cubs stayed where they were. Okay, so what we have out of this is kind of a chipping away. A little bit of chink in the armor for commissioner power. And again, Vincent, not a very popular commissioner, didn't last long. That always is a factor as well. So after these really strong commissioner power cases, we have one that's not so strong. The Vincent case with the Cubs. Cubs win. Any questions? Okay, we'll get more into this, some other situations with commissioner power next week. As I've talked out with a few of you, we could do the whole semester on commissioner power. We'll try to wrap it up next week and move on to more some of the free agency and antitrust issues. But we've got some more stuff to do with super teams, with steroids, with other commissioner acts, and whether they're legal or not. We'll see you next week.